The Development of Metaphysics in Persia by Iqbal. The most remarkable feature of the character of the Persian people is their love of metaphysical speculation. Yet, the inquirer who approaches the extant literature of Persia, expecting to find any comprehensive system of thought like those of Kant, will have to turn back disappointed, though deeply impressed by the wonderful intellectual displayed there. It seems to me that the Persian mind is rather impatient of detail. The Hindu, while admitting, like the Persian, the necessity of a higher source of knowledge, yet calmly moves from experience to experience. In fact, the Persian is only half consciousness of metaphysics as a system of thought. His Brahmin brother, on the other hand, is fully alive to the need of presenting his theory in the form of thoroughly reasoned out system. And the result of this mental difference between the two nations is clear. In one case, we have only partially worked out system of thought. In other case, the awful sublimity of the searching vendetta. Part 1 is pre-Islamic Persian philosophy, which deals with the Zoroaster, and part 2 is Greek, and then chapter 3 is about Islamic rationalism, and then chapter 4 is controversy between realism and idealism, and then chapter 5 is Sufism. Chapter 6 is later Persian thought. To Zoroaster, the ancient saga of Iran must always be assigned to the first place in the intellectual history of Iranian Aryans, who, wearied of constant roaming, settled down to an agricultural life. Zoroaster, the great prophet of Iran. Zoroaster inherited two fundamental principles from his Aryan ancestry. There is law in nature, there is conflict in nature. The original conflict of the two spirits is manifested in the opposing forces of nature, which therefore presents a continual struggle between the powers of good and the powers of evil. Things are good and bad because they proceed from good or bad creative agencies in their own nature. They are quite different. Zoroaster's view of the destiny of the soul is very simple. The soul, according to him, is a creation, not a part of God. It had a beginning in time, but came to everlasting life by fighting against evil in the early scene of its activity. Advent of Islam in Persia, which completely shattered the old order of thinking and brought to the thinking mind the concept of an uncompromising monotheism. Greek dualism of God and matter as distinguished from the purely Persian dualism of God and devil. Part 2. Greek dualism, the new Platonic Aristotelians of Persia. All human knowledge begins from sensations, which are gradually transformed into perception. The earlier stages of intellection are completely conditioned by the presence of external reality. But the progress of knowledge means to be able to think without being conditioned by matter. In order to understand whether the soul has an independent existence, we should examine the nature of human knowledge. It is the essential property of matter that it cannot assume two different forms simultaneously. The soul is essentially immaterial. The immateriality of the soul signifies its immortality, since mortality is a characteristic of the material. Avicenna, 1037. Among the early Persian philosophers, Avicenna also attempted to construct his own system of thought. His work called Eastern Philosophy. Avicenna defines love as the appreciation of beauty. things that are at the highest point of perfection, things that are the lowest point of perfection, things that stand between the two poles of perfection. But the third category has no real existence. Chapter 3. The Rise and Fall of Rationalism in Islam. The famous city of Basra had become, owing to its commercial situation, the playground of various forces: Greek philosophy, Christianity, Buddhist ideas, which furnished ample spiritual food to the inquiring mind of the time and formed the intellectual environment of Islamic rationalism. The conception of God and the theory of matter, therefore, are the only aspects of rationalism which we propose to discuss here. In order to explain the pure unity of God, Joseph Al-Basr lays down the following 5 principles. The necessary supposition of atom and accident, the necessary supposition of a creator, the necessary supposition of the conditions, ahwal of God, the rejection of those attributes which do not befit God, the unity of God in spite of the plurality of His attributes. The soul too is a finer kind of matter, and the process of knowledge are mere mental motion. Any account of the Asharite metaphysics would be incomplete without a notice of the work of Al-Ghazali, who, though misunderstood by many orthodox theologians, will always be looked upon as one of the greatest personalities of Islam. It was chiefly Ghazali influence that made men study dogma and metaphysics together, and eventually led to a system of education which produced such men as Al-Razi. From my childhood, I was inclined to think out things for myself. The result of this attitude was that I revolted against authority, and all the beliefs that had fixed themselves in my mind from childhood lost their original importance. I thought that such beliefs based on mere authority were equally entertained by Jews, Christians, and followers of other religions. Real knowledge must eradicate all doubt. For instance, it is evident that 10 is greater than 3. Al-Ghazali alone seriously took up the problem, and to this day it is difficult to define with accuracy his view of the nature of God. The soul, according to Al-Ghazali, perceives things, but perception as an attribute can exist only in a substance or essence which is absolutely free from all the attributes of body. Ghazali said, why the Prophet declined to reveal the nature of the soul? There are, he says, 2 kinds of men, ordinary and thinkers. Thinkers are led by their logic to a conception of the soul which sweeps away all difference between God and the individual soul. Al-Ghazali, whose restless soul after long and hopeless wanderings in the sands of dry intellectualism found its final halting place in the still deep of human emotion. Light, Ghazali teaches in this book, is the only real existence, and there is no darkness greater than non-existence. The universe was created out of darkness on which God sprinkled His own light and made its different parts more or less visible according as they receive more or less light. As bodies differ from one and another in being dark, obscure, illuminated, so men are differentiated from one another. The physical eye sees only the external manifestation of the absolute or real light. There is an internal eye in the heart of man, which, unlike the physical eye, sees itself as other things, an eye which goes beyond the finite. Chapter 5, Sufism, the origin and Quranic justification of Sufism. It has become quite a fashion with modern Oriental to trace the chain of influences. Love all and forget your own individuality in doing good to others, says Rumi. To win other people's heart is the greatest pilgrimage, and one heart is worth more than 1,000 Kaabas. The Quran thus defines the Muslims: those who believe in the unseen, establish daily prayers, and spend out of what we have given them. God is the light of heavens and earth. There is nothing like Him. The ultimate reality or eternal beauty, according to the Sufis, is infinite in the sense that it is absolutely free from the limitation of beginning, end, right, left, above and below. The ultimate principle of all existence is Nur-e-Qahir, the primal absolute light, whose essential nature consists in perpetual illumination. Nothing is more visible than light, and visibility does not stand in need of any definition. Light and darkness are two distinct realities created by two distinct creative agencies. Chapter 6, Later Persian Thought. Under the rude Tartar invades of Persia, who could have no sympathy with independent thought, there could be no progress of ideas. All schools of thought lost their solidarity, and many thinkers left their native country to find more favorable conditions elsewhere. No great thinkers, however, appeared in Persia under the 17th century, when the acute Mullah Sadra of Shiraz upheld his philosophical system with all the vigor of his powerful logic. There are three original principles: the real, light; the shadow; the non-real, darkness. The real is absolute and necessary, as distinguished from the shadow, which is relative. Conclusion. We have seen that the Persian mind had to struggle against two different kinds of dualism: pre-Islamic dualism and post-Islamic Greek dualism. The attitude of the pre-Islamic Persian thinkers is thoroughly objective, and hence the results of their intellectual efforts are more or less materialistic. The advent of Islam and the study of Greek philosophy checked the indigenous tendency towards monastic thought. Iqbal's thesis was the development of metaphysics in Persia. Metaphysics is a type of philosophy or study that uses broad concepts to help define reality and our understanding of it. It is concerned with explaining the feature of reality that exists beyond the physical world and our immediate senses. The definition of metaphysics is a field of philosophy that is generally focused on how reality and the universe begin. An example of metaphysics is a study of God versus the Big Bang theory. Is metaphysical the same as spiritual? Metaphysics is philosophical. It's about explaining the fundamental nature of the world. Spirituality, on the other hand, is experiential and has more to do with spiritual practices and the development and the discovery of what is another name for metaphysics? Mysticism, cosmology, religion, philosophy.